Today we're lucky enough to host Wing Tek Lum, whose newest book, The Oldtimers, is published by Bamboo Ridge. So this is a collaboration between myself, the library, Wing Tek, and Bamboo Ridge, who arranged for him to come. If you're interested and you really like the books, one, you might win one. We're giving away 2 copies. And if you're not lucky enough to win one, Wing Tek is also will be available after to sell you one gladly. So without any further, here's Wing Tek Lum. Thank you very much.
The young man. The young man brings up the rear as they stride towards the rice paddy single file, led by the old-timer chanting work songs. Warmed by a wholesome gruel of vegetable broth and some of their last harvest, his breath clouds the crisp silver air. His elongated shadow sweeps across the field, scattering the flurry of sparrows foraging among the tassels of ripening grain. He carries large balls of coarse twine to bundle together the top heavy stalks before they droop over one by one. His cloth shoes are damp with dew. He will anyway remove them when he wades ankle deep through the mud. He fingers a newly arrived letter, which he has tucked away in his tunic pocket to reread in silence on a break. Underneath the broad-brimmed hat, his queue is coiled neatly atop his head, nestled like a virtuous crown. First of all, I'd like to thank Andy and all of you for coming to this reading. I really appreciate your invitation to me. Hopefully all of you can hear with this microphone. Is that okay? This poem that I just read was inspired by an article written by Joseph Kwong Ming and Eliza Ho'okano Young and their family of rice growers in Kenai, Maui. I think it is a nice introduction to my book, The Oldtimers, which imagines the lives of our forebears, the pioneer generation of Chinamen in Hawaii around the turn of the last century. Although my collection is divided into 6 sections, today I'm only going to focus on 2, principally on what work these immigrants did in Hawaii, and then what they did in their spare time after work. Chinamen were also called pake here, and they were involved at that time in agriculture, mostly in the sugarcane plantations. My next poem tries to describe what challenging work that entailed. It is entitled Sugarcane Lament. Your throat is parched, but your whole body is heavy with sweat, toiling in the stark heat of summer. Your palms sting, blistered from the shoveling out broad ditches to carry water to this expanse of cane. Your nose is filled with the stench of the horse manure you gathered and spread once the shoots emerged. Your back aches from bending over your slender hoe, chopping up row after row of resurgent weeds. Your arms and your face bleed, slashed by the serrated leaves that pierce through your padded clothes. Your ankle throbs in pain, bitten by a centipede crawling up your pant leg as you cleared a mound of mulch. Your lungs are thick with ash after setting fires to a tangled stand, a frenzy of smoke escaping to the sky. Your thighs cramp up from crouching low all day, cutting down the stalks close to the ground. Your shoulders are knotted tight after hoisting the harvest of poles, bundle by bundle, onto the waiting carts. Your tongue tastes bitter as you peer down into the copper vat, brimming with its sweet, golden brew. There is a family memoir that can be found in the Hawaii Chinese History Center. It was written by descendants of Lugon, who leased the local Honolulu, an already established native Hawaiian fish pond near Pearl Harbor, from the John Ii estate. Lu paid an annual rent of $1,200 plus 18 crabs and 6 mullet. I stole the details of his enterprise what he called singlei, for this poem entitled Hard Night's Work. At midnight, under the rising moon, you row your small boat to the deep end of the pond, closer to the seawall, laying your linen net in an elongated crescent. Then from the shallows in front of the mouth of the crescent, you zigzag back and forth, banging your pole on the side of your boat and smacking your paddle against the flat surface of the water. You shout at the top of your lungs, rousing the sleeping fish. They bolt into your net, which you pull up end to end, your hand over fist. You make fast work of plucking out the fatter fish snagged by their gills. Quickly, you lay out your net again and haul in another catch, and then another and another, until your boat sits low in the water, until the fish piled up beside you weigh as much as you do. They gasp for air, and you take deep breaths. Back on shore, you wash down your boat, stretch out your net to dry across large racks, and sort the fish into their proper bamboo baskets to be driven into town, to be sold in the morning. Some are as long as your arm. Some have tapered snouts and rasping teeth, and others bulge with eyes so clear you can peer into them and fear and foresee your own hard death. Only then do you rest lying on your back beside the pond. You listen to the waves lapping the limestone and gaze up at the stars, tens of thousands of tiny silver fingerlings shimmering in the vast dark ocean. But you are fast asleep before dawn. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, this and other fish ponds in the vicinity were filled in. It is now, I believe, in the area of the Ted Macarena Golf Course, which is a few miles from here. The Hawaii Chinese History Center also published a book on Maui Chinese families, and I found one of them, that of Chung Kong Yo of Lahaina, very, very interesting. How all of his family took on various tasks to help turn taro into poi for sale. This is the inspiration for Poi Factory. Our family worked in shifts and took on different chores. Eldest sister and I woke up before dawn to prepare the day's meals for everyone. I also collected the kiawe from the shed and the water we needed for the steamer. My mother and father knew several languages spoken in our neighborhood and greeted the farmers who arrived throughout the day. They came with their mule carts loaded with heavy burlap bags full of taro. We scrubbed off the mud and fibers and placed the corms on wooden racks in our oven. Younger brother and younger sister were responsible for tending to the coal fire, making sure the pan of water was kept boiling, but also that it did not evaporate out. They took turns as well, wetting down the canvas draped over the oven. The corms, which had been steamed from the day before, were gathered up by my uncle and elder brothers. They peeled off the poisonous skin and with stone hammers pounded the taro. Some liked to buy just the mash. For others, we kneaded in water to sell as paste. All of us helped pack the poi into smaller cloth bags weighing 5 pounds each. These were picked up by peddlers who then spread out on chosen routes to call on households across the valley. Sometimes some of us took breaks to eat a midday snack, though not all at the same time. Whenever one task needed more hands, there were enough of us who dropped our own work to help out. Only when the sun was setting did we sit down all together for dinner, and then we went to bed, except for our parents, who stayed up by the kerosene lamp to settle the accounts and plan for the next day, which turned out to be the same as every other day, year in and year out, until I left home to get married. After the plantation contracts were expired, many Chinamen gathered around the towns, especially Honolulu's Chinatown. One of my favorite poems in this book is about a general store, which was inspired by one that my grandfather had, first on Hotel Street before the infamous fire, and then on King Street near A'ala Park after the fire. I pieced together information from the Internal Revenue Service archived in San Bruno, California, and some family stories, and even an essay which my father wrote as an assignment when he was a student at the University of Hawaii. This poem is entitled In the Store. The rumors about the fight at the sugar mill swirl around the saltfish and traveler's plum, the sleek sausages hanging under the open transom, the dried scallops, fat medallions of gold sorted by origin in wicker baskets. A barber comes in early to buy some young ginger and stays a while to chat with a schoolteacher's petite wife who's looking for peanut oil. Before she leaves, she coaxes her toddler to recite a quatrain out loud. All the uncles applaud, and the little girl gets to choose a rock candy from the tall glass jar under the counter. In the far courtyard, besides blue bundles of fishing lines and nets, the letter writer at his table listens patiently as the house painter relates the death of his brother. The two agree, however, to omit any mention to his widow of how he had died of opium poisoning. As the two get up to leave, a kinsman who raises ducks by the marshes presses a small coin without a word in the painter's gaunt hand. At the long counter, the taro farmer arranges with the owner to settle his accounts. He confesses the work in the fields is too harsh and he must return to care for his ailing wife. The government postman arrives with a thin envelope addressed to the stonecutter in care of the store. It is placed inside a locked drawer behind the main counter and will be picked up by the old man when he and his native wife stop in as usual the next Sunday. At noon, the clerk is sent out to buy vegetables. Another clerk doubles as the cook, and everyone eats their lunches discreetly, standing at their stations. They leave the scraps for a pair of calico cats, just enough to keep them coming around, but not enough to stop their hunt for rats. Rather than losing it again, a gambler sends his night's winnings to his mother. The cashier collects his money and will mail a coded letter back to the village where an elder holds a chest of silver for the store. The purveyor of bean curd pudding asks to barter for this week's delivery. Instead of cash, he will exchange his whole freshly made bucket for their best grade of tobacco. Surrounded by large tins of assorted tea in the storeroom off the kitchen, the owner's son fills out the manifests and shipper's declarations in between his English school assignments. Rice growers gather on the wide front lanai to complain about the sparrows, dark flocks swooping, devouring their crops. A few talk about buying a scattergun as a last resort. In the mezzanine, where they keep imported abalone and decades-old tangerine peels, the fugitive and his supporters, heads bowed, murmur softly in earnest discussion about the next rally. Clerks later on clear out a space for a card table. Among the displays of kitchen crockery after work, the owner and his buddies will stick around for a night of gin rummy. Newly arrived, a teenager is introduced all around, where he is from, whom he is related to, what manner of work he has done. The old-timers take in his every word about home. In the 1930s, a sociologist, Paul Siu, interviewed dozens of Chinese laundrymen in the Chicago area. This study turned into his dynamite work, A Chinese Laundryman. Much of this work is in the earthy voices of these men, talking story about their lives, their hard work, their loneliness, their few pleasures. In the book, Siu provided a floor plan of a typical laundry, and I used this as a guide to write my next poem, entitled The Laundryman. You would think our work would be fresh and clean, bathed as we are in soap and water. But I can only see in front of me the day's crumpled shirts, full of sweat and grime, the urine-stained underwear and mud-splattered pants, napkins smeared with food and drink, sometimes bed sheets with menstrual blood or handkerchiefs caked in snout, all gathering in the humid air in small spent piles in the back room. They will need to be steeped in hot water and scrubbed over the washboard, then cranked through stiff rollers to be wrung out to dry and pressed down flat by a sad iron straight from the stove. Only later, as eyes adjust to night, can they be fluffed and folded, wrapped in rice paper, neatly tied into separate bundles and placed on a shelf behind the counter. Only then will they be ready, waiting for you to pick up at your leisure. Nowadays, our social media trumpets every creative masterpiece from celebrity chefs. My next piece offers a different perspective of restaurant work. This is entitled The Banquet. Before. You cut off the bottom of the stem and then lengthwise slice the white cabbage into quarters. With the leaves facing down, you shake their tips in a bowl of water to remove any bugs. In another bowl of water, you mix in some salt and then lay in the clams. Throughout the day, you change the water and the salt. As they settle in, the clams express the grit inside their shells. You try to pick out bits of feathers stuck into the bird's nest made from swallow's saliva. It takes good eyes and nimble fingers. If it is too dry, you moisten the jelly to loosen it up. After peeling the shrimp, their heads and legs, their shells, segment by segment, you make shallow incisions along the curve of their backs to pluck out any veins blackened by waste, washing them off your fingers into a cup of lukewarm tea. You cut the coil of pig intestines into tubes the length of your thumb. Then you push a clove of garlic, which you have steeped in oil, through one open end, working it all the way to the other to scour out any crap. After. There are leftovers, sometimes braised shark's fin or fish maw or snow ear fungus. But you also see the cigarette ash in the soup and the half-eaten drumstick, and instead throw them all into the trash. You soak the plates and bowls in hot soapy water. After a while, you rinse everything off and wipe them dry, stacking each in its place on the back shelves, ready for use the next time. Some of the still hot tea you pour over the chopping block to help break down any grease when you scrape it with your cleaver. You whisk the wok too, a few quick swishes with a stiff bamboo brush. You sweep the floor, making sure to get into the corners. The dirt and grime that you collect in your pan, you dump out the door. It is the same when you mop, wringing out the dark water onto the street. You set out a tin of water for the neighborhood cat and shut the windows and then turn down the lamps. Everyone else has gone, and when you leave, you carry out the garbage. A few young men at that time were also employed in domestic work, like perhaps this young man who was serving as a houseboy. Every day but Sunday, I left our home at dawn to walk half an hour to the big house on the hill, arriving in time for me to help set the table for the breakfast. My kinsman was a gardener and had recommended me for this job. I had to wear a white shirt, wash my hands, and wind my queue atop my head. My chores kept me busy, most especially the service in the dining room, bringing out the courses, removing them when foul, then helping to wash and dry the dishes to be ready for the next meal, all the while ever careful not to break any of the glasses or the porcelain. But I also swept the floors. Even the lanai hung and beat the drums, the rugs on the laundry lines, chased after chickens to kill, shined shoes, peeled potatoes, helped with the flowers in the foyer, and carried out the trash to the pit to be burned. Some days I had the free time to play with the dog on the grass, throwing a small coconut for her to fetch. At other times I could sit atop the lava rock wall to watch the fishing boats as they one by one returned to the harbor. And then at the end of the day, before the preparations for summer, I would go into the kitchen to see the cook, who always dismissed me with my pail of leftovers. This would be for my evening meal, a part of what they paid me, which I would bring home to eat. Usually I would get back before the sun had set, and we would open up the pail to discover bits of boiled beef with stewed yams, maybe a fish head, papaya chunks, or day-old biscuits, a lamb chop, or some hard cheese. It was not enough for me to share with my family, only just what I could consume by myself. Since they no longer had to feed me, they let me have all of it. In the old days, Some young girls were sold by their families to work for others. Julia Flynn Seiler, in her book, The White Devil's Daughters, writes, Mui Jai means little sister in the Cantonese dialect, and refers to children who would become household slaves. So I tried to imagine the life of one of them in this next poem, entitled Little Sister. My grandfather did not like me because I was not a boy. My mother said to give me up since I was an extra mouth to feed. My father quickly sold me off to cover all his gambling debts. My paper father bought me since he knew a way to bring me over. An immigration man let me in as they gave him enough silver. My paper mother called me little sister, but I served her as a house slave. But then they sold me once again because I had become too old. The brothel keeper bought me because I was still so young. One man paid a bonus for the privilege of being my first. Other men kept paying for me because they had no wives here. And even later, they still visited, although I had fallen sick. I died a short while later because I could not afford the herbs. I never had a funeral, as no one had the money for it. My body is buried in an unmarked grave, as if I had not lived at all. According to the 1900 census, there are about 6.5 Chinese men for each Chinese woman in Hawaii. This created a very abnormal society of bachelors who readily turned to gambling, opium, and prostitution for their diversions. Regarding the latter of these vices, I would like to share a poem written from the point of view of someone whose job was called a wife of 100 husbands. My poem is entitled, Truth Be Told. Truth be told, there is never any pleasure, no clouds and rain, for me that is. The men, of course, after their brief thrusting, squirt their joy and slink away. It is a business only, and so if I can survive by making money, then I am happy enough. The small cash I carry in my purse can buy me food and a place to sleep. I even keep a yellow eagle sewn into my underwear for any contingencies. But these shiny coins will not stop the shopkeepers' wives glaring as they clutch tightly onto the arms of their men. It will not prevent the gazes of their husbands who see me only with my thighs always raised. But these are the lucky ones, mandarin ducks who frolic under the full moon, finally able to reunite. All the other poor souls here wait like the cowherd for his weaving maid, languishing in the village. They were the same at home, young cocks strutting about with every hen clucking and cooing. But when they arrive, they can only find work cooking, washing clothes, and cleaning houses for others. They serve like women, taking orders, biting their tongues, lowering their heads. Only when they visit me, my pliant flesh, do they recall the hibiscus tents of their youth. They kiss, they fondle, they prod and poke, they shed their masks, the night in their two hands. As a footnote, the authorities tried to contain the brothels within a certain section of Chinatown, bounded by Pauahi River and Nu'uanu streets. Some of you may be familiar with this area, but perhaps were not aware of its unique history earlier in Hawaii. I'm next going to read an excerpt from a short story. It is about a barber, which may not seem very exciting, except in those days, before the 1911 revolution, barbers served a special role in the subjugation of the Chinese people. This was because the Qing dynasty rulers, the Manchus, required all Han Chinese males to shave their foreheads and keep their top hair into long pigtails or queues. So the drama of the story revolves around how my protagonist negotiates through these politics. However, I'm just going to share with you a small section describing what the barber actually did, his trade craft. So this piece is called The Razor King. Gum was sent to these islands with a brand new razor presented by his father. At their parting, the elder Gum cautioned his son, "You come from a long line of honorable tradesmen. Mastering your skill is the best way to serve your customers. You have our Gum name to uphold." Indeed, in Chinatown, Gum surpassed his father's talents, epitomizing the old adage, indigo comes from blue, but then exceeds the blue. His straight-edged steel razor was kept very busy. Gum developed a routine, always starting on the forehead and moving around to the customer's right side as he circled the top knot. When he finished the head, he worked on the face down to under the chin where it meets the supple neck. It was a meticulous process involving both hands. With his left, Gum sought the hard and soft contours of his customer's head, paying close attention to any bumps or dips. His fingers stretched taut the intended patch of skin, and then with his right hand scraped off its hair with his steady blade. He did so delicately, as if without pressure, running against the direction of its natural growth for a smoother cut. Only from experience could he maintain such a deliberate focus of his stance and his breathing, and his eyes to control his hand, and by extension, his ever so sharp razor. With his light touch, there was nary an instance when he drew blood, and if he did, it was a nick so shallow that bleeding was easily staunched with a proprietary astringent, a generations-old blend of witch hazel. Afterwards, he put down his razor and spread out the queue as if billowed by a soft breeze. It was time for him to clear his thoughts, a personal meditation, his horsehair brush working through the knots and tangles in a calming downward motion. He ended with a dance of his nimble fingers, a tight plaiting of 3 separate strands woven into a long, snug queue. When he reached the tip, he handed it over to the customer to hold fast with a pinch. String already prepared was then looped and tied in 3 places, the top, the middle, and the end, to keep the queue from unraveling. Customers walked out of Gum's shop with shoulders square and heads held high. No wonder Gum was known as our razor king. So, if you want to find out what happened to this barber, the book is over there. You can buy it for $20, and I'll autograph it. I was also inspired to write a few prose vignettes for this book, what I called a series of 1-paragraph stories, loosely connected to a certain theme or situation. In one series, I tried to imagine what some of those in Chinatown did after work, during their time off. And so I'm going to read several prose vignettes from a piece entitled Reflections. The church offered free food on Sundays after their services and also taught English, so Fan duly closed his bakery on that day to make the time to join in their activities. He enjoyed listening to the choir sing in unison and seeing the children, some of the few in Chinatown, play with each other. He understood that these people believed in a life after death, an idea he could not fathom, but he attended every week without fail because they seemed at peace in this life. Here was a community he discovered, different from his own, different from the world of the long days by himself spent tending to his oven. The church members, in return, welcomed his presence, as well as his egg custard tarts. They understood his hesitations, but were patient. They even gave him a new name, Ira. Luke's grandfather was a soldier who died fighting in the English when they invaded our homeland. His father rebelled against the corrupt barbarian officials who had ruled us for centuries. He had to escape to these islands. The martial spirit was in Luke's blood. Resistance to all occupiers filled his lungs. This was an impulse which guided him throughout his life. He worked as a clerk in a hardware store, but what he did to support himself did not matter. He spent his free time learning about revolvers. He had 3 of different calibers and always kept them thoroughly clean. In the mountains, he honed his shooting, noting for each weapon, the range and accuracy and the size of impact that its bullets made on the tree trunks. Whatever money he earned then went to buying more ammunition for more target practice. Luke hoped one day he would be able to return to his country with these modern killing skills to aid in its liberation. Old Cheng needed help in his old age. He was alert, his hearing and his wit were still good, but it was hard for him to get around, even to go downstairs. Some of his friends each week took turns to visit him on their respective days off. Choi from the herb shop on Sundays, Ching the hack driver on Mondays, and Wong, who sold vegetables at the market on Thursdays. They bought food and prepared enough meals to last Cheng a few days. They also took out his night soil, washed his clothes, and generally cleaned up around his bed. All of them enjoyed spending the time sitting by the window with old Cheng, sharing the gossips of the day. In addition, Choi brought his ukulele to practice on, and Wong was prone to reminiscing about how they had once provisioned watermelons for the natives during their failed rebellion. The three friends lived in the different parts of town, so they never saw each other in person. But they were kept up to date on each other's doings through their successive visits with old Cheng. Actually, growing up, Bright Virtue knew nothing about the opera. Then he became smitten with a famous actor, Lau, when the latter toured the islands and was feted at the restaurant where he worked. A brief but intense affair ensued as Bright Virtue was handsome and willing to be seduced. Lau broke it off when he departed, and Bright Virtue was left with his waiter's job and a longing that could not be diminished. He volunteered with a local troupe, diligently attending their rehearsals after work. Although he could not sing, he found he had a talent for making props: oars to suggest rowing a boat, whips for a riding horse, a fan to be fluttered by a busy matchmaker, a table for a hero to climb to reach a mountain lookout, all to conjure up the illusions of something more. During his newfound leisure time, the retired newspaper editor embarked on a project to memorize the 300 Tong poems. Yam began with the shorter ones, only 4 lines long, 20 words total, the ones he had learned as a child. As his repertoire expanded, he asked his wife to follow along with book in hand, especially to give him prompts whenever he faltered. At one point, his wife noticed that as Yam memorized more poems, he began to forget other things. She wondered whether humans had only a finite brain, like a house where one could add a new bookcase, but only if you got rid of the armchair. On the same day that her husband mastered Lee Seung-yeon's poem about night rains, he could not recall where he had put his umbrella. The manager of a lumberyard, Gong, was respected but not well liked. He treated everyone fairly and honestly, but not in any personable way. It was best that he sat in the mezzanine handling orders and invoices. He lacked the flair of his clerks to service the unique needs of individual customers. As an old-timer, Gong was also invited to clan meetings and merchant banquets. Yet, truth be told, if he were unable to attend a gathering, no one would have missed him. Indeed, he sensed that people found him nondescript, but he did not know what else he could do. He believed he must be true to himself. He decided to keep his head down and devote himself to his job. So on the days the yard was closed, Gong nevertheless could be found inside, checking out a pallet of 2x4s that had just arrived. The family store had been Fuzzy's whole world. He had been delivered by a midwife in their home upstairs. Once he learned to walk, his father took him down to roam the narrow corridors between the bags of rice and bins of tea. Long-time customers often treated him to lumps of candy. With him, the clerks played hide and seek. But now he had to sit in school at a school desk without squirming to recite out loud the 3-character classic. His chalk-stained teacher droned on and on in a sing-song voice. Fuzzy could not help but daydream about a dumbwaiter that connected the 2 levels of his home, with him crouched inside, riding it up and down, up and down. The mahjong game was down to only 3 members. Formed a decade ago by 12 Churks and Lums from the same village, they had met each Sunday for lunch, after which they broke up into 3 tables to play for the rest of the afternoon. However, their numbers had been depleted by disinterest, resettlement, marriage, and death. Unable to play, the original 3 had invited new members, acquaintances who hailed from other villages. But for some reason, it was not the same. A few played too slowly. Another man held radical political views, which he kept espousing, even when asked not to. At present, they had to endure the acrid smoke from Brother Watt's cigars, which he indulged in nonstop. Their sole hope was for Old Lum's nephew to join them after finishing out his contract with the sugar mill the next year. On the first train out, Snake brought with him a fat fish and a tin of tobacco, some dried mushrooms, medicines, and the latest newspapers. Once a month, he visited younger cousin with these or similar gifts. He had been charged with looking after this relative, a recent arrival. Luckily, both had the same day off. They spent the morning cooking a large lunch for younger cousin and his buddies. After work, in the shade of the lanai, the Snake listened to as the younger cousin complained about working in the forlorn fields for meager wages. Snake, in turn, urged patience with the promise that he would try to help find a job in town. Soon, Snake had to board the afternoon train. On his return, he found a seat in the front with 2 newly harvested pineapples on his lap. He fingered their pokey exteriors. Their lives were like this fruit, Snake mused. It was so hard to savor the sweetness within. So I'm going to read a final poem, which isn't really about work or about recreation, but it's just a pipe dream of what I imagine Chinatown might have been like 125 years ago here in Hawaii. It's called At Dusk. The tabby cat has made her usual rounds, but these days are shorter now, and she keens the darkness coming sooner. She hugs the walls and sneaks across the alleyway, one lone meteor rushing headlong home. Behind the restaurant, amid lengthening shadows, a cashier beats an empty can with his spoon, calling her to a dinner of leftover fish heads, their gelatinous eyes a shimmer of pearls, promising a succulent return to their primal sea. A cook inside fires up his wok, deeply patinaed, stir-frying slices of pork belly and vegetables, then adding a dollop of his secret shrimp paste, this tiny seed quickly blossoming into a bouquet permeating the courtyards as the light recedes. The old-timer, hanging his threadbare wash, revels in the savory aroma of this serendipity. In the gloaming, he breaks out into song, his taut line of bleached white clothes pegs paddling in unison into the gathering wind. On the balcony, the prostitute hums along, recalling the folk melodies of her childhood before silvery moons waxed and waned. She sips from the restorative tea of her reverie, reluctant to leave when her shift begins. The baker has spied on her from his window, but he breaks away at his time for him for his early bed. He sleeps through the violins rehearsing next door, his snores a chorus to their 2-stringed melancholies. He will wake up refreshed before the cocks crow. Thank you. Maybe some questions or comments? Yes?
What first got you into writing?
Could you repeat that question? What?
What was the first thing that kind of drawed you into being a writer?
Being a writer, you mean when I was about your age in college?
Yeah.
Unrequited love. Okay, next question. Yes?
Do you have any other published works, or is this your first?
Can you speak louder?
Oh, sorry. Do you have any other published works, or is this your first?
Okay. The question is if I have any other published works, and the answer is yes. This book is my 3rd collection of poems, published by Bamboo Ridge, here locally in Honolulu. But Bamboo Ridge has also published in 1987 my first book entitled Expounding the Doubtful Points, and then in 2012 my second book of poems, The Nanjing Massacre Poems, which was about a nasty period in Chinese history. So the second book is available online. The first book is hard to get. It's because it's pretty old. Yes?
Would you say that most of your poems are inspired by like true events or history?
Yeah. Okay, so I would say most of them probably are inspired by something that happened in real life, historically speaking. However, that doesn't mean that I'm very faithful to the exact events, historically speaking. I like to make things up and mix things around. But hopefully the finished product, the poem that is actually read and which you can read in a book, is something that rings true in a different way than it being literally, historically accurate. But it rings true in another way, so that inside here it will resonate with you as being something that's accurate. Does that answer the question?
Yes, but so the second part to my question, some of the things that you said, at least to me, struck me as being like very graphic. Like the laundry one, I was almost like.
Okay.
So I guess my question to you is, what inspires you to write something in such a graphic manner?
Okay. At home, my wife does the laundry. Okay, so I have nothing to do with that. So I don't have that kind of experience, although I guess when I was your age in college, yes, I did laundry by myself. However, I think the book that I cited, The Laundryman, which was a study done in Chicago, it did give information about the details of how these guys actually carried out their work, from getting the dirty clothes to what they had to do to wash them, to wring them out, to dry them, and then to fold them up and get them ready. So there was a general process which I followed, and then I kind of imagined the specific details. So there was a process that I followed that was guided by the book, and especially that floor plan that I mentioned. Okay, but the details were things that I made up, but hopefully still, to somebody who does do laundry, still rings true to them. Okay.
It was good.
Yep.
It just seemed very, I don't know, I've just never had laundry explained.
But that's the challenge. I think the challenge that I would give to all of you is my writing style is one where I try to give details. I try to be very graphic. So I'm more of an imagistic type poet, which means that I want to try to lay out what I see is going on, and then let you guys, the readers, figure it out and say, and make a conclusion. I try not to have an ending which has a direct political message. I let you guys figure it out for yourselves. That's kind of what I try to do. But I hope, if I'm successful, that you get the message that I want to convey because of the details that I've included in the poem. Yeah. You had a question?
You kind of already answered my question. My question was, at the end of whoever is reading this book, what was your purpose for it, or what did you want them to feel?
I want to share a story. Okay, I want to share my feelings about, let's say, laundrymen, or about a general store like my grandfather's, or somebody who's working in a fish pond. I want to show how they worked hard, like in the fish pond. They worked hard, but they they did a lot of different kinds of detailed work. I try to detail what they did. But then that they accomplished something. Their work has some value to it. And I hope that by giving these details, you as a reader or as a listener get that message, and that I don't have to say, and these guys really worked hard and they deserve all the money they get. I don't have to say that at the end, right? Because hopefully I've done my job as a poet to put that inside the poem already. Okay. Yeah, yes.
You explore a lot of different types of relationships, like the store owner and your customers, and also like family and then church. I'm wondering, what do you think is the most important thing that creates a sense of community?
Oh, a sense of community. Okay. The most important thing, I think, is that I came up with all these different stories, all these different people, so that each one individually is unique and is valued for himself or herself. But then they're set in the context of these other poems or other stories, and so you can develop a picture for yourself, hopefully, of a community of individuals, of a unique people living together. And that's kind of what I try to do. It can't be accomplished in one poem. So it may be able to be accomplished in one book, which has 82 different pieces in it. So hopefully there's all these different points of view as you work your way through reading the entire book. You get bombarded with all these different points of view, which gives you a better picture of an entire community, like what I imagine Honolulu Chinatown might have been like 125 years ago. Okay. Yes?
How do you decide how vivid you want to get with your imagery, and like where do you want to begin the story and where do you want to end it? Because it sounds like you're taking very little pieces, like little slices of daily lives of all these people.
Okay. This goes into how I write stories or poems. There's what I call a 4-stage process. The first stage is I don't know what I'm writing about. I don't know if I have anything to write about. I'm just kind of searching. I read books that maybe have to do with a certain period of time or some traditional custom or whatever, and maybe I don't get inspired, and then I go into something else, another article, or go online and read something else, or talking story with somebody and saying, oh, what they told me, their story, I can steal for my own, to put it in a poem. So the first stage is really just blank mind, just trying to get a lot of information from all sorts of places, but then waiting for some hook. Once I get the hook, I go to my second stage, which is a percolating stage. Everything, my ideas are saying, oh, this is a really neat idea, but what am I going to do with it? So I mull about it. I'm driving the car, taking a shower, or just before going to sleep, I'm thinking about this, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. It's all in my mind, but it's focused on some vague idea. And then the third stage is, at some point, I get off my okoli and I sit down and I write something down. Okay? It's the first start. And it's what I call a flesh-made word. So it turns into a word. It could be by hand, or it could be on my computer typing it out. So I just somehow I get off my okoli and I write something down. It may not be that great, but at least it's tangible right now. The word is tangible, because that's just, and then sometimes that moment turns into something like 15, 16 lines long. It's not just one or two words. It can be something pretty long, because I've been percolating about this for a while. So if I'm lucky, maybe it's 15 lines long, but at other times it's only 2 or 3. Okay, so I'm writing, so that's the start. And the fourth stage is revision. Just keep working on it. and then I keep working on it, keep working on it. So that's hopefully answering your question on various stages of how I start the poem, get inspired, and then it gets to the point where it's shared with other people. But I don't have I don't start with a purpose. Oh, you know, I know these guys at UHWO really love, I don't know, to surf or whatever. So I'm going to write a poem about surfing. That doesn't work for me. Okay, what works for me is having a free, open mind, and then reading stuff and finding a hook. So it's a little bit different from other talented writers who can write a poem about a certain chosen subject from the very beginning. Okay. Yes?
Follow up on that one. So that was your process for a single. So when you start to then transition it into a larger work, like what the book you read today, is that a conscious decision of, I really like this first thing I wrote, can I do more of that? Or
Yeah.
I'm going to read more in that subject?
Yeah. Not in the beginning, not in the first, with the first poem, but actually, you know, if I do 2 or 3 and say, hey, this is a pretty interesting period, maybe I can do a little bit of research and write one more, and then that turns out to be okay, then I continue to do research and find another poem to write about. So that's a 3rd or 4th or 5th poem. And so the collection gets larger and larger. At some point, I'm exclusively researching stuff on this particular period, at this time and place in Hawaii. For instance, I'll give you an example. You guys all know about the notorious fire in Chinatown of 1900. There was a bubonic plague. A Chinaman was discovered in December of 1899 who died of bubonic plague. And because it was widespread in China, the health authorities here in Hawaii said, we've got to quarantine all of Chinatown. So 16 blocks of Chinatown were quarantined. They were militia patrolled the streets, the boundaries. And they also decided to have controlled burns where if there was a person who died in a building, they took those guys out and they burned that particular building. Unfortunately, on January 20th, 1900, which is almost 125 years ago, one of the controlled burns there was a boo-boo, and it spread, the fire spread and burnt down all 16 blocks of Chinatown. So I was reading about this right around the time of COVID. So 2020, when beginning year of COVID, I got this book, Plague and Fire, by James Moore, and I read it, and I kind of compared the lockdown that we were experienced in 2020 with the lockdown, the quarantine in Chinatown 124 years ago, or 120 years ago at that time. And so that kind of echoed for me. And I have a whole section in my book, which I didn't read today, but there's a whole section in my book on the quarantine, Chinatown fire, and the aftermath of that. So again, you can buy the book and read it. Yes, maybe last question.
How have the stories you want to tell in your process changed through the decades?
I think I've become more mature. I kind of, before it was just more like getting an individual story or individual poem written and feeling good about that. Later on, because of, it turned out to be about 82 pieces, I had a conscious understanding that this was part of a larger collection, and there were certain themes that I was trying to relate each piece to other pieces. So that perspective, I think, was what was important for me and matured me in writing the latter part the latter story of poems in this collection. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? One last question? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.